Good afternoon. My name is Ido Oberski, Queen Margaret University. It's my pleasure to introduce the last speaker. Thank you very much for staying with us, and thank you for Michele for taking the last slot here. Dr. Michele Hipwell is an accredited health psychologist, teacher, and trainer with over 25 years experience in higher education, the NHS, and voluntary organizations. She's an environmentalist and an experienced mindfulness practitioner, and her recent work has focused on supporting grassroots communities to develop better living environments, creative solutions for preventive health and well-being, and the application of mindfulness and contemplative education in the workplace and higher education. Michele's a colleague of mine. We have known each other for about 7 years now. We got to know each other through mindfulness, and we're currently working on developing a course on contemplative education at Queen Margaret University. Michele Hipwell.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with such a wonderful, range of speakers and such a responsive audience, I have to say. Very nice to take part in this conference. So what I'm going to talk about today is going to be quite narrow focused, and one of the things that I'm interested in is how well-being and the effect of emotion on well-being are kind of talked about and conceptualized and practiced in both Western and Buddhist tradition, and in turn how mindfulness affects emotion regulation and well-being. So I think we've heard so much today about emotions and about well-being, that there seem to be, the knowledge and understanding is so varied. And I'm going to keep it quite narrow, because I feel it feels more comfortable to take a certain approach to do this, bearing in mind all these other interesting development and approaches. And finally, I'm really interested to think about your own personal experience of what mindfulness, emotion, and well-being might mean for you. But to start with, I'd like to know, I think Dan asked yesterday, how many people knew about mindfulness and have practiced mindfulness on a regular basis. Okay, so it's interesting. There's already quite a few people who have done that. So the first thing I'm going to think about is how Buddhist and secular mindfulness practitioners have defined happiness, and then we will pause to reflect on how each of us understand what happiness might mean for us. So I will ask for a bit of participation in this. So what is it? I think to start with, I might think, what do I consider to be happiness for myself? And thinking about it, I think I'm a kind of a bit of a mongrel. I take a bit of comparing a kind of Buddhist and secular approach, and in the sense that it's more of a philosophical view of happiness, and which is close to some of the Buddhist approaches. And what, if we use this term, is defined by eudaimonic rather than hedonistic happiness. And it's about seeking to better understand what my existence is about and reality, and the importance of leading a meaningful life, or what for me is a meaningful life. So a kind of genuine happiness is less likely to be found in a way in the external world, but perhaps much more arise from a balance and perhaps compassionate mind, and I'm interested in continuing to develop this aspect of my life, So that's kind of feel to me more what like happiness might be for me. And so as a consequence, my goal is focused on on external achievements such as worldly success or consumer good. It's more about, what really feel real and interesting to achieve and to do, and what has meaning for me in my life. And I suspect as I get older, that becomes more and more the case, in a way. Doesn't mean that I don't like to go shopping. So what I would like to do with you as a short exercise is to reflect for yourself. What does happiness mean for you? How would you think about happiness for yourself? So I'm going to start and do a very short meditation, about a couple of minutes, and then get you to reflect on what happiness actually means for you. So if you care to, just stand with your back straight, but not stiff, so that you, beg your pardon, sit. You would like to stand. You could stand as well, actually. There's nothing wrong with standing if you prefer it. Yeah, that's going to be nothing against standing. Standing or sitting or lying down as well, endless possibilities. But if you're sitting, so your back is straight and not stiff, and your neck and your head are aligned with your spine. And you kind of maybe closing your eyes if that feels comfortable, or looking in the middle distance. And then dropping your shoulder and feeling the weight of gravity. Imagine what it's like to be grounded with your feet on the ground. Maybe if you can, your shoes, your toes spread out as much as you can, really feeling the ground. And just bringing your attention to sensation. So the sensation of your feet on the floor, of your limbs against each other. Any sensation of your body that comes to you, just observing that. And then just gradually bring your attention to your breath, the sensation of the breath. And remember, breathing is a rhythmic exercise, in and out. So just following the flow of the breath as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Particularly at the abdomen, maybe seeing how the abdomen stretches out as you breathe in and falls back as you breathe out again. Following breath. And then coming back into the room. And now spending and pausing for a couple of minutes to think about this question of happiness. What does it mean for you? Thank you very much. I hope that's interesting. So here this wonderful picture of Scotland. So French people bring Scotland to you this year. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about people that have really brought mindfulness forward into into the Western world, but at the same time we both have Buddhist roots. The first person that Dan talked about yesterday as well is John Kabat-Zinn, who is being an inspiration for the development of mindfulness practice in the US and throughout the world increasingly. And one of the important aspects of mindfulness, as John Kabat-Zinn and also Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist, understand it, is again what Dan talked about yesterday, which is presence, being very much in the present moment. And if you look at the definition from John Kabat-Zinn, or one of his definitions, it's paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience, moment by moment. And it's very much this experience of how things unfold in the present moment that is very important in mindfulness. And Thich Nhat Hanh has a slightly different but very similar way of thinking about mindfulness, and which is to be aware. To be aware when you're breathing in and out, the capacity to be aware of what is there. Anything can be the experience of mindfulness. Your breath, the sky. It is to be in touch with all our felt experience in each moment. And again, it's a very similar view, isn't it? It's about this felt experience in the here and now. Because as both John Kabat-Zinn and Thich Nhat Hanh say, now is the reality. What happened in the past or in the future doesn't exist. We really exist in the present moment. So let's make sure that we do. So to now kind of think about mindfulness and the development of mindfulness when I was trained in mindfulness over 10 years ago now, where I was working part of the time in a psychiatric hospital, and some of my colleagues said, "Are you interested in going on this course in mindfulness?" And I said, "Yes, that sounds really, really interesting." And at the time it was not very well known, but since then, the development of mindfulness and mindfulness approaches has just been exponential. It is so interesting to see how many different ways mindfulness is being used and has been developed. And a lot of it has been development through John Kabat-Zinn's initial program that he developed over a period of 30 years. The mindfulness-based stress reduction 8-week course in mindfulness, which is a kind of foundation, an introductory courses in mindfulness. And John Kabat-Zinn, when he developed mindfulness, was at the time working with people who had physical health problems, including chronic illness. And he was thinking, is there anything that we can offer these people beyond medication and that is really going to help them? And this is how he started to develop this course in mindfulness, based on his own mindfulness practice, because he had been interested in Zen Buddhism and in Vipassana meditation. So from this experience and practice of mindfulness, he developed this 8-week course. And initially the course, for the first 20 years, the course was developed particularly for behavioral and physical as problems. But after that, in the 1990s, started to see an increase in the use of mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness for intervention for mental health problem, and then so many more, so many different ways in which it's being developed. And if we look at Thich Nhat Hanh, which we talked about, he also was a very interesting and influential practitioner of mindfulness, and he's currently still living in le village des Prunes in the northern part of France, exiled from Vietnam. And he is a fascinating man, and he writes incredibly simply and beautifully. But he's a poet, he's a peace activist, and he kind of coined the term engaged Buddhism in his book, Vietnam Lotus in a Sea of Fire. And his approach has been to combine a variety of traditional Zen Buddhist teaching with insight from other Buddhist tradition, method from Theravada Buddhism, idea from Western psychology, to offer a kind of modern light on meditation practice. But the importance of training your attention in the present moment is common to both Jon Kabat-Zinn and Thich Nhat Hanh, as well as other practices that we will discuss. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing for time, despite my watch. To continue with Thich Nhat Hanh, I remember how in the village des Prunes, he encourages all family to come and meditate with them. It's really hard to get everybody as a family to relate to mindfulness and to be mindful. So it's developing a way of life that is mindful. But to move on from this, and because I'm I like to talk about, to really define what I talk about. And the first thing I'm going to just kind of define is how emotions are defined by psychologists, dreaded psychologists. And psychologists tend to think about emotion as a kind of subjective, conscious experience, and it's made up of different aspects of our experience. There's psychophysiological expressions, so that we sweat, we have autonomic reaction of some kind, we might feel emotions in our gut, and so on, and biological reaction and mental state. There's different ways in which we can experience emotion. And emotion is also seen as a subset of affect, so that it's, we have moods, which are longer lasting, but emotions are often much shorter reaction. And this is a Western scientific definition, and we will elaborate a bit on this if we have time. And well-being, well, we've had so many definitions of well-being, and I feel that using the World Health Organization definition is incredibly limiting, but at the same time, we spend a lot of time thinking about it, so it might be worth giving them a go. So it's a state in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, and that is important, reaching our potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And it is also kind of thought of as a dynamic process, which gives people a sense of how their life is going. So the interaction between their circumstances, the activity, and the psychological resources. And it also involves a sense of self-fulfillment. So I don't know how you will that will resonate with you. Then moving on to the term mindfulness. The term has been used in so many different ways that it's very difficult to kind of pin it down in some ways, because it has been referred to as a mode of awareness, not being in the present moment, a range of meditation and attention training. There's so many different meditation practices, and they all have different effect on our body, and some are used in the early stages of meditating, and others are more complex, and we learn to practice them when we are further into our training. And it's also associated with a number of psychological processes, sort of, self-regulation, being able to self-regulate ourselves, something called metacognition, which are kind of, yesterday when Dan got us to just observe our mind and open up our mind, which John Kabat-Zinn also called choiceless awareness, this is what it was like, that the thoughts are seen as transient, insubstantial mental event, rather than accurate representation of reality. And it also described attention training, which is a process of keeping our awareness focused in a particular way. Because we can either take part in open awareness meditation, where we really just leave ourselves up to any experiences that come through our mind, be it sensory or our thoughts, whatever comes into our field of awareness. Or we can focus on very concentrative meditation, like when we were doing the meditation of the breath. And to start with, it's much easier for people to focus on something, like the breath, that feels comfortable. Choiceless awareness, some people find very difficult to figure out and manage to start with. So, and the next thing is talking about mindfulness-based intervention. How much longer have I got? 5 minutes, okay. Right, so mindfulness-based intervention, very briefly, John Kabat-Zinn, who really started the whole 8-week course that is now used all over the world. This course has now been developed by so many different people and organizations to suit their purpose. Perhaps the most well-known is the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is for people who have recurrent depression. And what happened in mindfulness-based CBT, as it's called, is that it is combined with cognitive therapy, and is now National Institute of Clinical Excellence recommended treatment instead of medication for recurrent depression. So it's very much embedded into the health service. But there are so many different approaches. Some people I know are using it for chronic pain at a hospital in Edinburgh. People are using it, like Guido and I are doing, for combining with contemplative education, working with students in higher education, and so on. And these, in the workplace, increasing amount of people are using it in the workplace. It's used in the armed forces, it's used in prison. I know a GP practitioner in Glasgow who is using mindfulness in prison, and it has amazing results. It really changes people's lives a lot of time. So I'm not going to have much time to say very much, but I'd like to say just a little bit on mindful emotions. And then there's kind of Western views of emotion which we have discussed just for a little while. And is quite different from the Buddhist view of emotion. Because when you ask a Buddhist what emotions are, they will say, well, the Buddhists do not have a word for emotion, because they do not divide mental processes into categories such as thoughts or emotion. However, some Buddhist psychologists divide the emotion into afflictive mental state, for instance, craving, hunger, pride, and also compare these to wholesome mental state, such as having a sense of self-respect, being conscientious, non-attachment, and equanimity. And they particularly emphasize the cultivation of the 4 wholesome states, which are associated with mental balance, so emotional balance, mental balance, well-being, and genuine happiness. And these are the quality of compassion, loving kindness, and we did yesterday with Dan a short meditation, which was very much a loving kindness meditation, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. So loving kindness developed a vision of genuine happiness for us and others. Compassion developed the courage to see clearly obvious and subtle causes of suffering together with the deepest causes of suffering. And it resulted in a sincere wish to train the path that ends suffering and to support others on their quest to be free from suffering. And then rejoicing, which I really like. I like rejoicing. And it balances compassion, thought, focus on wholesome thought, emotion and action. We are also engaging every day, often without noticing. And it really fuels our determination to continue with mind training. And finally, equanimity, which comes to us after a while of training, which teaches us how to extend the highest degree of loving kindness and compassion to everybody, including people we do not know or are hostile to us. A kind of deeper meaning of happiness and suffering linked to this interconnectedness and shared nature of human experience. So this willingness to connect with suffering and with God lead to a deeper experience of well-being and happiness, and open the door to the deeper nature of the man. So the Buddhist approach to emotion highlights the possibility of consciously and purposefully developing positive mental habits, involving healthy mental state with the development of wholesome emotion being central to Buddhist mind training. And I was going to give you a short meditation on rejoicing, but I don't think we have time for that, will we? No? I'm asking my timekeeper here. No.
No, if we don't know how I'll eat as well, yes.
Okay, that's fine. So that's it. Thank you.